Hey everybody, how's it going? I've got something a little bit different for you today. I'm going to be doing a movie review. The movie we're going to be looking at is called Mission of Honor. It's also known as Hurricane overseas. This movie tells the story of the 303 Squadron. This was a squadron that was mostly consisting of Polish fighter pilots, but also some from Czechoslovakia and other nations that were fleeing German occupation. They flew for Britain during the Battle of Britain, and their story is quite incredible. Now, you may be wondering, why are we talking about a movie on a wargaming channel? And that's a very good question. But I'd like to argue that movies play a huge role for historical wargamers. First of all, I believe that movies really influence us in the armies we choose to play, especially when we're modeling our units based off of the ones that we see in film. I know Band of Brothers is always a popular one. The Rangers from Saving Private Ryan. I know that I have a U.S. paratrooper army for bolt action that's based off the 101st Airborne Unit represented in the Brothers in Arms video games. So I know it's a huge influence in our army selection. I also know it's an influence on the battles that we decide to portray. Whether it's the D-Day landings or Stalingrad, really any well-known battle that's represented in film. It's a way for us to further interact with history in a different medium. And so I really believe that film and media plays a large role in our wargaming. And so if you're interested in air combat, if you're interested in dogfighting on the tabletop, or if you're just interested in history in general, you may have noticed Mission of Honor on Netflix. And I wanted to talk about it mostly because I'm not very impressed. Now, I know it's a low budget film, and that's okay. I and that's okay. I've seen plenty of low budget films that use what they have and can create a great film. So let's start with the good. Mission of Honor was filmed in Britain, filmed in France. I feel like the sets were very good. Everything from the fighter bases to pubs. Costumes were good, very good. There are some scenes, even portraying like a German airfield with the BF-109s, and it looks really good. It looks like a large budget war movie. They pay very close attention to the details when it comes to uniforms and setting, and even the planes look good. Another good thing is just the multitude of languages that are represented in the film. I love that they didn't use English language for the German guys. You hear German, you hear Polish, you hear Czech, English. All of those things are represented very well. And probably the last good thing, I guess, is that it highlights really the terrible treatment of the Poles. Now, if you know anything about World War II history, Poland was invaded on two sides by Germany and the Soviet Union, and Britain and France were supposed to come to their aid. They declared war, but really left the Poles to die. And even when those numbers of Polish fighter pilots and Polish soldiers made their way to Britain and fought with the Allies later in the war, they were really rejected at the end of the war, sent back home, which at the end of the war, Poland became part of the Soviet Union, and there was just, of course, so much persecution. So the movie really does a good job to put into people's minds just the terrible treatment of the Polish pilots. And that's pretty much where the good ends. let's talk about what's not so great about this film. I'll start with the CGI. The dogfights look cheesy, and I want to make it clear that this doesn't break the film in itself. Um, like I said before, I've seen low budget films that use what they have and can create something really great out of it. I wouldn't say that bad CGI instantly kills the movie for me. Um, it is cheesy. It is hard to watch something like the classic movie Battle of Britain, or even the dogfight scenes from Dunkirk, and then switch over to something like this, where everything is just computer generated aircraft and dogfights. It, like I said, it doesn't kill the movie itself, but it does detract from it a little bit. Um, and if it was just the CGI that was bad on its own, I would give it a complete pass. But it's the CGI combined with everything else that's bad in this movie that really kills it. So first, um, editing and the story. The editing in this film is horrible. I'm talking just random scenes thrown in there. You never know exactly what's going on with these pilots, or the characters in this movie. There's so many different story arcs that are presented and then just totally forgotten about. Nothing really makes sense. And what you really want to do is connect with the pilots in this film, since it's about them. So that's really hard to do. Now, I don't know if it's just because I'm American, but I had a hard time distinguishing some of the pilots from one another, especially when they're in the cockpit. So when you see fighter pilots get shot down, I didn't really feel anything because I didn't really know who was dying. I didn't know what was happening. There are just so many random scenes. There's an arc about a pilot who is afraid to shoot Germans down, goes off and just shoots his guns into the air. He has something against killing people, which is an interesting arc, but it's just never really explored. It's mentioned. They say, hey, you need to be grounded. He flies anyway. I think he dies, but again, I don't know. Nothing is really well pronounced or focused. There's some romance in the movie, but it's not really realized. It's not grounded, and nothing just really connects very well, which is a shame. But yeah, there's just random scenes. There's a scene where I laughed out loud at two parts of this movie, which is never good for a historical movie, especially one that's portraying combat and death and suffering. But the female protagonist walks into a hospital, and there's a British fighter pilot that she was romantic with at the beginning of the film, but then he's a jerk. But then she comes into the hospital and says, hey there, handsome, and you see half of his face, and he turns the other half, and you see that he's all burnt on one side, and he goes something like, I'm not handsome anymore, and she just goes, oh, and then the scene ends, and then that's it. So like everything is so disconnected. It's really hard to stay invested with the story. Another thing that's really bad is the acting and the directing. Now, when I say the acting, it's not necessarily the individual actors themselves. I feel like it's more of how those actors were used or directed. So again, like when fighter pilots die, there's no reaction by anyone. They just die, and the other pilots usually are just staring. There's nothing at all to indicate any kind of emotional drama, the emotion of loss. It's just very cardboard, which is interesting because when the pilots are on the ground, the Polish actors show a lot of emotion, and they talk a lot about how terrible things are in Germany, and there's a lot of emotion, and you can see that the actors actually can portray that pretty well. So I don't know why in the air it's so difficult for that to come across. The second time I laughed out loud. Um, there's the main character and his wingman. Uh, they're dogfighting over the channel. They mention that they're low on fuel. They need to turn back. They decide to stay and dogfight. So they're coming back. They're about to fly over the cliffs of Dover, and all of a sudden, his wingman, I guess, runs out of fuel just in time, and engine stops, and his hurricane just crashes into the cliffs of Dover, which I I found really hilarious because I feel like a pilot would know better. I don't think like a pilot running out of fuel would try to fly over the cliffs of Dover. I don't know. But also, what added to the hilarity to me was that the main character, whose wingman just died horribly, he just stares. There's no reaction. There's no mention of his wingman dying when they get on the ground. It's very cardboard, to the point of where it's almost laughable. Now, I want to talk about some things that this film could have been. There's one scene in this movie that I actually really like. So the British hold basically a party, like a gala, for the Polish pilots because they realize that the Poles are shooting down so many Germans and they're doing so well. So we're at the party and the Polish pilots are kind of just grouped among themselves, but they don't really, they're not participating in the party. They're not really dancing. You can tell that they're upset. And so the British general that set up the gala comes over to them and asks, like, why aren't they enjoying the party? And they talk about how their families and their people back home are being persecuted and slaughtered and tortured and just murdered by the Germans occupying their country. And here in Britain, they're just partying. And I felt like that was a really good point, a really good scene to make. And honestly, I feel like the whole film could have been centered around that. It would have been a much more interesting look into their story. And that kind of goes along with my next point of what it could have been. If you've ever seen the original movie Tuskegee Airmen, not Red Tails, not the George Lucas one, that film really focused more on the emotional and the physical effects of air combat. Partly because they didn't really have great CGI back then. So the dogfights were less impressive, but they decided to focus on the pilots more. And I really feel like that's what this film should have been. I mean, pilots during the Battle of Britain were doing multiple sorties a day, coming home just completely exhausted. Not to mention just the emotional exhaustion and the strains of war, of seeing your buddies die, even of killing killing other pilots. It's a really that's a really engaging story, and I don't know why that wasn't the focus of this movie. Like Red Tails, I think this film just wanted to be more spectacle with these dogfights. But when you don't have enough budget for CGI or shots of real aircraft, why go that direction? I'm not really sure. So all in all, would I recommend this movie? No, I would not recommend this movie. In my opinion, I feel like it was rushed. I feel like the editing and the story aren't well connected. There's not really anything for the viewer to relate with or get tied to emotionally. The dog fights are very cheesy. There's nothing new there. I wouldn't recommend this film. I would recommend watching the original Battle of Britain. That one can't be beat, honestly. The film Dunkirk has some really great dogfight scenes with real aircraft. That's always better than CGI. So yeah, I would avoid Mission of Honor if at all possible. So that was my review of the movie. Let me know if you agree or disagree. Like I said, this is all just my opinion, but I wanted to give you guys my take on it. And if you like this video, if you like the movie reviews, let me know. I'd love to do more. I love film, and I love analyzing movies, especially historical films. I feel like that's my sweet spot. And if you found this video dumb or not relevant to wargaming, let me know that too. And don't worry, I've got some more battle reports coming. I've got one in production right now in the editing process, and I hope to just continue to improve my tabletop, my scenery, my videos, and editing. And hope to hear from you guys. Have a good one.
You English need all the help you can get.
Hostiles gathering over Calais.
Get 303 up now.
Scramble!